好啦，夠鐘啦，咁我哋開始咯。
Good afternoon and welcome. My colleagues and I understand the hardship that high inflation is causing, and we are strongly committed to bringing inflation back down to our 2% goal. Over the past year, we've taken forceful actions to tighten the stance of monetary policy. We've covered a lot of ground, and the full effects of our rapid tightening so far are yet to be felt. Even so, we have more work to do.
咁而家其實頭半段嚟嘅，咁佢就係講咧，就係講我今朝鋪出嚟嗰個新聞稿嘅內容嚟嘅。
As the bedrock of our economy.
咁記者問答就會喺講完呢個新聞稿之後開始。
In particular, without price stability, we will not achieve a sustained period of labor market conditions that benefit all. Today, the FOMC raised our policy interest rate by 25 basis points. We continue to anticipate that ongoing increases will be appropriate in order to attain a stance of monetary policy that is sufficiently restrictive to return inflation to 2% over time. In addition, we are continuing the process of significantly reducing the size of our balance sheet. Restoring price stability will likely require maintaining a restrictive stance for some time. I will have more to say about today's monetary policy actions after briefly reviewing economic developments. The U.S. economy slowed significantly last year, with real GDP rising at a below-trend pace of 1%. Recent indicators point to modest growth of spending and production this quarter. Consumer spending appears to be expanding at a subdued pace, in part reflecting tighter financial conditions over the past year. Activity in the housing sector continues to weaken, largely reflecting higher mortgage rates. Higher interest rates and slower output growth also appear to be weighing on business fixed investment. Despite the slowdown in growth, the labor market remains extremely tight, with the unemployment rate at a 50-year low, job vacancies still very high, and wage growth elevated. Job gains have been robust, with employment rising by an average of 247,000 jobs per month over the last 3 months. Although the pace of job gains has slowed over the course of the past year and nominal wage growth has shown some signs of easing, the labor market continues to be out of balance. Labor demand substantially exceeds the supply of available workers, and the labor force participation rate has changed little from a year ago. Inflation remains well above our longer-run goal of 2%. Over the 12 months ending in December, total PCE prices rose 5.0%. Excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 4.4%. The inflation data received over the past 3 months show a welcome reduction in the monthly pace of increases. And while recent developments are encouraging, we will need substantially more evidence to be confident that inflation is on a sustained downward path. Despite elevated inflation, longer-term inflation expectations appear to remain well anchored, as reflected in a broad range of surveys of households, businesses, and forecasters, as well as measures from financial markets. But that's not grounds for complacency. Although inflation has moderated recently, it remains too high. The longer the current bout of high inflation continues, the greater the chance that expectations of higher inflation will become entrenched. The Fed's monetary policy actions are guided by our mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. My colleagues and I are acutely aware that high inflation imposes significant hardship as it erodes purchasing power, especially for those least able to meet the higher costs of essentials like food, housing, and transportation. We are highly attentive to the risks that inflation poses to both sides of our mandate, and we are strongly committed to returning inflation to our 2% objective. At today's meeting, the committee raised the target range for the federal funds rate by 25 basis points, bringing the target range to 4.5% to 4.75%. And we are continuing the process of significantly reducing the size of our balance sheet. With today's action, we have raised interest rates by 4.5 percentage points over the past year. We continue to anticipate that ongoing increases in the target range for the federal funds rate will be appropriate in order to attain a stance of monetary policy that is sufficiently restrictive to return inflation to 2% over time. We are seeing the effects of our policy actions on demand in the most interest-sensitive sectors of the economy, particularly housing. It will take time, however, for the full effects of monetary restraint to be realized, especially on inflation. In light of the cumulative tightening of monetary policy and the lags with which monetary policy affects economic activity and inflation, the committee decided to raise interest rates by 25 basis points today.
其實你聽好頭先佢啦，都重點講咗話，其實其中一個最主要令到 inflation 落唔到嚟嘅 element 就係個 housing price，即係租金啦。
To assess the economy's progress toward our goals, as we determine the extent of future increases that will be required to attain a sufficiently restrictive stance. We will continue to make our decisions meeting by meeting, taking into account the totality of incoming data and their implications for the outlook for economic activity and inflation. We have been taking forceful steps to moderate demand so that it comes into better alignment with supply. Our overarching focus is using our tools to bring inflation back down to our 2% goal and to keep longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. Reducing inflation is likely to require a period of below-trend growth and some softening of labor market conditions. Restoring price stability is essential to set the stage for achieving maximum employment and stable prices over the longer run. The historical record cautions strongly against prematurely loosening policy. We will stay the course until the job is done. To conclude, we understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country. Everything we do is in service to our public mission. We at the Fed will do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Chris Rugaber of Associated Press. Thank you for doing this. As you know, financial conditions have loosened since the fall, with bond yields falling, which has also brought down mortgage rates, and the stock market posted a solid gain in January. Does that make your job of combating inflation harder? And could you see lifting rates higher than you otherwise would to offset the increase in, or to offset the easing of financial conditions?
So it is important that overall financial conditions continue to reflect the policy restraint that we're putting in place in order to bring inflation down to 2%. And of course, financial conditions have tightened very significantly over the past year. I would say that our focus is not on short-term moves, but on sustained changes to broader financial conditions. And it is our judgment that we're not yet at a sufficiently restrictive policy stance, which is why we say that we expect ongoing hikes will be appropriate. Of course, many things affect financial conditions, not just our policy. And we will take into account overall financial conditions along with many other factors.
其實你之後咧會睇到佢答幾樣問題咧，都係講話佢會 ongoing 咁樣去有 interest hike 嘅。咁呢次係第一次講。
Hi, Chair Powell. Thank you for taking our questions. Rachel Siegel from the Washington Post. Over the last quarter, we've seen a deceleration in prices, in wages, and a fall in consumer spending, all while the unemployment rate has been able to stay at a historic low. Does this at all change your view of how much the unemployment rate would need to go up, if at all, to see inflation come down to the levels you're looking for?
So I would say it is a good thing that the disinflation that we have seen so far has not come at the expense of a weaker labor market. But I would also say that disinflationary process that you now see underway is really at an early stage. What you see is really in the goods sector, you see inflation now coming down because supply chains have been fixed, demand is shifting back to services, and shortages have been abated. So you see that in the housing services sector. We expect inflation to continue moving up for a while, but then to come down, assuming that new leases continue to be lower. So in those two sectors, you've got a good story. The issue is that we have a large sector called non-housing service, core non-housing services, where we don't see disinflation yet. But I would say that So far, what we see is progress, but without any weakening in labor market conditions.
Has your
Go ahead.
Has your expectation for where the unemployment rate might go changed since December?
You know, we're going to write down new forecasts at the March meeting, and we'll see at that time. I will say that it is gratifying to see the disinflationary process now getting underway, and we continue to get strong labor market data. But you know, we'll update those forecasts in March.
market data 即係 employment rate 出嚟好高啦，而家暫時咁啊，佢哋會3月先至會再去 update 到個新數字，咁都係睇數字做人咯。
That would let some of the air out of the labor market without major job losses. We saw the opposite in the December JOLTS this morning. Job openings actually rising. That also has coincided with slowdown in wage inflation. Do you believe that openings are an important indicator to be studying to understand where the labor market is and where wage inflation might be heading?
So you're right about the data, of course. What we've seen average hourly earnings and now the employment cost index abating a little bit, still off of their highs of 6 months ago and more, but still at levels that are fairly elevated. The job openings number in JOLTS has been quite volatile recently, and I did see that it moved back up this morning. I do think that it's probably an important indicator. The ratio, I guess, is back up to 1.9 job openings to unemployed people who are looking for work. So it's an indicator, but nonetheless, you're right. We do see wages moving down. If you look across the rest of the labor market, you still see very high payroll job creation, and you know, quits are still at an elevated level. So by many indicators, the job market is still very strong.
Colby and then Howard. Thank you. Colby Smith with the Financial Times. Given the economic data since the December meeting, is the trajectory for the Fed funds rate in the most recent SEP still the best guidepost for the policy path forward, or does ongoing now mean more than 2 rate rises now?
So you're right. At the December meeting, we all wrote down our best estimates of what we thought the ultimate level would be, and that's obviously back in December, and the median for that was between 5 and 5.25%. At the March meeting, we're going to update those assessments. We did not update them today. We did, however, continue to say that we believe ongoing rate hikes will be appropriate to attain a sufficiently restrictive stance of policy to bring inflation back down to 2%.
但佢其實仍然都係持續堅持緊話會 ongoing high 㗎呢度
And financial
，until 嗰個 inflation 係 back to
I
2%。
would say we still think there's work to do there. We haven't made a decision on exactly where that will be. I think, you know, we're going to be looking carefully at the incoming data between now and the March meeting and then the May meeting. I don't feel a lot of certainty about where that will be. It could certainly be higher than we're writing down right now. If we come to the view that we need to write down, to move rates up beyond what we said in December, we would certainly do that. At the same time, if the data come in the other direction, then we'll make data-dependent decisions at coming meetings, of course.
Just as a quick follow-up, how are you viewing the kind of balance of risk between those 2 options of, the likelihood of maybe falling short of that or going beyond that level?
I guess I would say it this way. I continue to think that it's very difficult to manage the risk of doing too little and finding out in 6 or 12 months that we actually were close but didn't get the job done, and inflation springs back and we have to go back in, and now you really do worry about expectations getting unanchored and that kind of thing. This is a very difficult risk to manage, whereas of course, we have no incentive and no desire to over-tighten, but if we feel like we've gone too far, we can and inflation is coming down faster than we expect, then we have tools that would work on that. So I do think that in this situation where we have still the highest inflation in 40 years, the job is not fully done. As I started to mention earlier, we have a sector that represents 56% of the core inflation index where we don't see disinflation yet. So we don't see it. It's not happening yet. Inflation in core services ex housing is still running at 4% on a 6 and 12-month basis. So there's nothing happening there. In the other 2 sectors representing less than 50%, you actually, I think, now have a story that is credible, that's coming together, although you don't actually see disinflation yet in housing services, but it's in the pipeline, right? So for the third sector, we don't see anything here. So I think it would be premature, it would be very premature to declare victory or to think that we've really got this. We need to see, our goal, of course, is to bring inflation down. And how do we get that done? There are many, many factors driving inflation in that sector, and they should be coming into play to have inflation, the disinflationary process begin in that sector. But so far, we don't see that. And I think until we do, we see ourselves as having a lot of work left to do.
Howard Schneider with Reuters, and thanks as usual. So I just wanted to connect a couple dots here. The statement's made a number of changes that seem to be saying things are getting better. You're saying inflation has eased. That's new. You've taken out references to the war in Ukraine as causing price increases. You've taken out references to the pandemic. You've eliminated all the reasons that you said prices were being driven higher. Yet that's not mapping to any change in how you describe policy. We still have ongoing increases to come. So I'm wondering, why is that the case? And does it have more to do with uncertainty around the outlook, or more to do with you not wanting to give a very overeager market a reason to get ahead of itself and overreact?
佢而家問緊佢點解個市咁勁啊？就算佢而家係咁加息都。
Say it this way. We can now say, I think, for the first time, that the disinflationary process has started. We can see that, and we see it really in goods prices so far. Goods prices is a big sector. This is what we thought would happen since the very beginning, and now here it is actually happening, and for the reasons we thought. It's supply chains, it's shortages, and it's demand revolving back towards services. So this is a good thing. This is a good thing. But that's, around a quarter of the PCE price index, core PCE price index. So the second sector is housing services, and that's driven by very different things. And we, as I mentioned, with housing services, we expect, and other forecasters expect, that measured inflation will continue moving up for several months, but will then come down, assuming that new leases continue to be soft. And we do assume that. So we think that that's sort of in the pipeline. And we actually see disinflation in the goods sector, and we see it in the pipeline for two sectors that amount to a little less than half. So this is good, and we note that when we say inflation is coming down, this is good. We expect to see that disinflation process will be seen, we hope soon, in the core goods ex-housing, the core services ex-housing sector that I talked about. We don't see it yet. It's 7 or 8 different kinds of services. Not all of them are the same, and we have a sense of what's going on in each of those different subsections. Probably the biggest part of it, probably 60% of that is, research would show is sensitive to slack in the economy, and so the labor market will probably be important. Some of the other ones, the labor market's not going to be important. Many other factors will drive it. In any case, we don't see disinflation in that sector yet, and I think we need to see that. It's the majority of the core PCE index, which is the thing that we think is the best predictor of headline PCE, which is our mandate. So it's not that we're neither optimistic nor pessimistic. We're just telling you that we don't see inflation moving down yet in that large sector. I think we will fairly soon, but we don't see it yet. Until we do, I think we see ourselves, we got to be honest with ourselves, we see ourselves as having perhaps more persistent inflation in that sector, which will take longer to get down. And we're just going to have to complete the job. I mean, that's what we're here for.
不過其實佢 repeat 咗好多次，都係要撳低房地產嗰樣嘢，所以其實對呢樣嘢都要 bear in mind。
Without above target inflation, and we have learned lately that inflation can come down from its uncomfortably high level despite a historically low unemployment rate. Given that, and given how much you did over the last year, why do you think further rate increases are needed? Why not stop here and see what transpires in the coming months before raising rates again?
So we've raised rates 4.5 percentage points, and we're talking about a couple of more rate hikes to get to that level we think is appropriately restrictive. And why do we think that's probably necessary? We think because inflation is still running very hot. We're, of course, taking into account long and variable lags, and we're thinking about that. The story we're telling about inflation is, to ourselves, and the way we understand it, is basically the three things that I've just gone through a couple times. And again, we don't see it affecting the services sector ex housing yet. But I mean, I think our assessment is that we're not very far from that level. We don't know that, though. We don't know that. So I think we're living in a world of significant uncertainty. I would look across the spectrum of rates and see that real rates are now positive, right, by an appropriate set of measures, are positive across the yield curve. I think policy is restrictive.
有時聽到佢咧會講 service ex housing 嗰樣嘢咧，其實即係話 service exclude housing 呢樣要知一啲。
We're going to be carefully watching the economy and watching inflation and watching the progress of the disinflationary process.
Did you or your colleagues discuss the conditions for a pause at this meeting this week?
Well, you'll see the minutes will come out in 3 weeks, and we'll give you a lot of detail. We spent a lot of time talking about the path ahead and the state of the economy, and I wouldn't want to start to describe all the details there, but that was the sense of the discussion, was really talking quite a bit about the path forward.
Victoria?
Hi, Chair Powell. I wanted to ask about the debt ceiling. Given that we've now hit up against it, I was wondering if the U.S. goes past the X date, will the Fed do whatever the Treasury directs as it relates to making payments as the fiscal agent, or will it do its own analysis of any legal constraints?
佢呢個係問緊而家美國就嚟 hit 到 debt ceiling 嗰個限期啊嘛，咁佢話究竟 Fed 有冇啲咩可以做到去幫呢樣嘢咧？咁其實咧呢個係浪費咗呢個時間嘅問題嚟。其實呢樣嘢係兩黨去 deal 嘅。其實同埋最後都一定要做嘅一樣嘢。
Okay. So I feel like I have to say this. There's only one way forward here, and that is for Congress to raise the debt ceiling so that the United States government can pay all of its obligations when due. And any deviations from that path would be highly risky, and that no one should assume that the Fed can protect the economy from the consequences of failing to act in a timely manner. In terms of our relationship with the Treasury, we are their fiscal agent, and I'm just going to leave it at that.
Are you actively doing any planning of what might happen in the event that would happen?
I'm just going to leave it at that. This is a matter that's to be resolved between it's really Congress's job to raise the debt ceiling, and I gather there are discussions happening, but they don't involve us. We're not involved in those discussions, so we're the fiscal agent.
Gina and then Steve.
Gina Smilik from the New York Times. Thanks for taking our questions. I wonder, was there any discussion today of the possibility of pausing rate increases and then restarting them? Lori Logan from the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas seemed to suggest that would be a possibility in a recent speech, and I wonder if that view is broadly shared on the committee.
So the committee, obviously, did not see this as a time to pause. We judged that the appropriate thing to do at this meeting was to raise the federal funds rate by 25 basis points, and we said that we continue to anticipate that ongoing increases in the target range will be appropriate in order to attain that stance of sufficiently restrictive monetary policy that will bring inflation down to 2%. So that's the judgment that we made. We're gonna write down new forecasts in March, and we'll certainly be looking at the incoming data as everyone else will.
Clear. I mean, would it be possible to take a meeting off, for example, and then resume? Could you, rather than just doing at every meeting a move, go a little bit more slowly, take some gaps in between moves?
I mean, I think this is not something that the committee is thinking about or exploring in any kind of detail. In principle,
問佢會唔會話可能唔會連續幾次咁樣加息落去，會唔會可能隔一期先至會加多0.25咁啦，類似。咁阿 Powell 就話呢樣嘢唔係佢哋 consider 緊嘅嘢。
I mean, you saw what the Bank of Canada did, and they left it that they're willing to raise rates after pausing. But this is not something that the Federal Open Market Committee is on the point of deciding right now.
Steve Leisman, CNBC. Mr. Chairman, the SEP has the PCE inflation rate in 2023 at 3.1%. Meanwhile, the 3-month annualized PCE is 2.1%, And you've achieved this without going to your 5.1% funds rate, which is what you have penciled in for this year. And you've also achieved it without the 1 percentage point increase in the unemployment rate, which you have penciled in for this year. I'm wondering if you've considered the idea of whether or not your understanding of the inflation dynamic may be wrong, and it's possible to achieve these things without raising rates that high, and also without the surge in unemployment. And specifically, I wonder if you might comment on the speech given by Vice Chair Lael Brainerd, who said, to the extent that inputs other than wages may have been responsible in part for important price increases for some non-housing services, an unwinding of these factors. In other words, it may not be wages, the idea that it may not require unemployment rising to get this sector of inflation under control. Thanks.
So a couple things. First, on the forecast, you're right. If you take very short-term, three-month, say, measures of PCE, core PCE inflation, they're quite low right now, but that's because that's driven by significantly negative readings from goods inflation. Most forecasters would think that the significantly negative readings will be transitory, and that goods inflation will move up fairly soon back up to its longer run trend of something around 0, something like that. So a lot of forecasts would call for core PCE to go back up to 4% by the middle of the year, for example. So that's really where the sustainable level is more like at 4%. So that would suggest there's work left to do. Let's say inflation does come down much faster than we expect, which is possible. As I mentioned, obviously our policy is data dependent. We would take that into account. In terms of the core non-housing services, as I mentioned earlier, it's a very diverse sector, 6 or 7 sectors, and so sectors that represent 55 or 60% of that subsectors of that sector we think are sensitive to slack in the economy, sensitive to the labor market in a way. But some of the other sectors are not. And for example, financial services is a big sector that's really not driven by labor markets, wages. So that's why I said there are a number of things that will affect. Take restaurants, right? So clearly labor is important for restaurants, but so are food prices. And transportation services is going to be driven by fuel prices, for example. So there are lots of things in that mix that will drive inflation. I would say overall, though, my own view would be that you're not going to have a sustainable return to 2% inflation in that sector without a better balance in the labor market. And I don't know what that will require in terms of increased unemployment, your question. I do think there are a number of dimensions through which the labor market can soften. And so far we've
其實佢講咗幾個 example 啦，其實最後都係就係只要 unemployment rate 都一直持續咁低咧，根本就冇可能撳低個 core inflation。
Probably rise a bit from here, but I continue to think that there's a path to getting inflation back down to 2% without a really significant economic decline or a significant increase in unemployment. And that's because the setting we're in is quite different. The inflation that we
咁其實呢樣嘢同我哋之前講 Fred 嗰條片一樣啦。其實佢真係，其實佢做咁多嘢都係喺個 demand side 嗰度控制嗰個價錢。咁啊，包括係撳住呢個，即係佢想其實即係令到 unemployment rate 增加，從而去令到啲人少咗錢使，咁嘅話就令到喺 demand 嗰方面去 cut down 啲 price 咯，咁啊可以解決 inflation 嘅問題。
But I think there's ongoing disinflation, and we don't yet see weakening in the labor market. So we'll have to see.
Can we get there with 5%?
Certainly possible. Yeah, absolutely, it's possible. It's a question. No one really knows. I think it's because this is not like the other business cycles in so many ways. It may well be that as
其實佢仲有10零分鐘就完㗎啦，而家16分鐘左右。
slowing than we expect, than I expect to get inflation down to 2%. But I don't. That's not my base case. My base case is that the economy can return to 2% inflation without a really significant downturn or a really big increase in unemployment. I think that's a possible outcome.
嗱，呢度比較重要啦。嗱，佢重申一次佢想有一個 佢想令到 core inflation 去翻2% 啦。咁咧其實佢就講話，其實佢唔係話想令到 unemployment rate shoot up 嘅，但係問題就係其實呢個係佢唯一嘅工具咯。即係佢冇講出嚟啦，但係其實你睇到佢由頭到尾講嘅嘢都係 unemployment rate 同埋呢個 core inflation， 其實佢係兩樣嘢其實不停咁交替講噶嘛。咁其實呢個係佢其中一個最重要工具咯，佢冇得避嘅其實。
I think many forecasters would say it's not the most likely outcome, but I would say there's a chance of it.
Michael McKee from Bloomberg TV and Radio. I'd like to pick up on what you were just saying about a substantial downturn and ask, with the full weight of your tightening not in place yet, and with the progress against inflation, there's still a lot of talk about very, very slow growth going forward in 2023, and the recession indicators are all suggesting that we are going to see recession this year. So I'm wondering if you've changed your view, or you have a more nuanced view of what you think the danger to economic growth is going forward, and whether you're very close to perhaps tipping it into the wrong place, which calls for more restraint on your part.
So I do think most forecasts and my own assessment would be that growth will continue, positive growth will continue, but at a subdued pace, as it did last year. We had growth of GDP growth of 1% last year, and also final sales growth, which we think is a better indicator of about 1%. I think most forecasts.
其實嗰啲問題咧問佢係會軟着陸定硬着陸嘅。咁我阿 Paul 就答翻佢話，其實佢哋睇嘅咧就係話，其實個 GDP 嘅增長會放緩，但係都有增長啊。暫時講嘅嘢。
We'll have seen that the global picture is improving a bit, and that will matter for us potentially. The labor market remains very, very strong, and that's job creation, that's wages. As inflation does come down, sentiment will improve. You also, state and local governments are really flush these days with money, and many of them are considering tax cuts or even sending checks. So I think that's going to support. They're also spending a lot. There's a lot of spending coming in the construction pipeline, both private and public, and so that's going to support economic activity. So I think there's a good chance that those factors will help support positive growth this year. And that's my base case is that there will be positive growth this year.
Thank you. Rich Miller from Bloomberg. First of all, how are you doing?
Fine, thanks. Fine.
Good. Second off, I think earlier on in the press conference, you said you need to see substantially more evidence of inflation coming down. Can you give us some idea of what you're thinking of? You mentioned 3 months, that we've seen 3 months in a row. Governor Waller suggested he might want to see 6 months. Is it just the inflation data, or do you have to see the labor market coming back into better balance to have that substantially more evidence
So I don't think there's a.
佢而家問佢咧，究竟點樣先算係睇到究竟 inflation 係 come down 到？
Accumulation of evidence. So of course we'll be looking, by the time of the March meeting, we'll have 2 more employment reports, 2 more CPI reports, and we'll be looking at those carefully, as all of us will.
不過 Paul 都係話佢會繼續睇嗰啲 PCI report 啦等等啦，咁都要睇到2-3個月。咁我話佢唔係淨係睇1-2個數字啊，佢會綜合嚟睇等等等等等等。
Which, as you know, is a report that we like because it adjusts for composition and it's very complete. And the one we got, I guess it was yesterday, was constructive. It shows wages coming down, but still at a high level. They're still at a level that's well above where they were before the pandemic. So I don't want to put a number on it in terms of months, but as the accumulated evidence comes in, it's going to be reflected in our assessment of the outlook, and that will be reflected in our policy over time. But I will say, though, it is our job to restore price stability and achieve 2% inflation for the benefit of the American public. We're not, market participants have a very different job. And it's a fine job, it's a great job. In fact, I did that job for years, but in one form or another. But, we have to deliver that. And so we are strongly resolved that we will complete this task because we think it has benefits that will, support economic activity and benefit the public for many, many years.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Fed Chairman, for taking the questions. So you've talked about we had solid job growth. I'm Edward Lawrence from Fox Business, by the way. We had solid job growth, a slight falling in the increase in consumer spending. It seems so far it's been relatively mild from the economy to go from a 9.1% CPI inflation to 6.5% CPI inflation. Is the hard part yet to come to go from 6.5 to 2?
I don't think we know, honestly. So we, of course, expected goods inflation to start coming down by the end of 2021. And it didn't. It didn't come down all through 22. And now it's coming down, and it's coming down pretty fast. So I would say this is not a standard business cycle where you can look at the last 10 times there was a global pandemic and we shut the economy down and Congress did what it did and we did what we did. It's unique. So I think certainty is just not appropriate here. Inflation, it's just harder to forecast inflation. It may come down faster. It may take longer to come down. And, our job is to deliver inflation back to target, and we will do that. But I think we're going to be cautious about declaring victory and, sending signals that we think that the game is won, because we've got a long way to go. It's the early stages of disinflation, and it's most welcome to be able to say that we are now in disinflation. But that's great, but we just see that it has to spread through the economy and that it's going to take some time. That's all.
How long do you see then the federal funds rate remaining at this elevated level?
So my forecast and that of my colleagues, as you will see from the SEP, and there are many different forecasts, but generally it's a forecast of slower growth, some softening in labor market conditions, and inflation moving down steadily, but not quickly. And in that case, if the economy performs broadly in line with those expectations, it will not be appropriate to cut rates this year, to loosen policy this year. Of course, other people have forecasts with inflation coming down much faster. That's a different thing. If that happens, if inflation comes down much faster, then we'll be seeing that, and it will be incorporated into our thinking about policy.
Simon. Thank you, Chair Powell. Simon Rabinovich with The Economist. May I ask a further question about the language around ongoing increases? That, of course, implies at least 2 further rate rises. If you look at Fed Fund futures pricing, the implication is that
呢個係佢其中一個成場最有趣嘅一個問題之一嚟嘅。
about that divergence, or do you think if everything breaks right, is that a plausible outcome?
嗱，佢呢個問題咧就係問佢，喂，而家成個市場預計你係唔會加到去500至525，即係嗱，佢今次加咗0.2啊嘛。咁之後佢就話，總之市場就係話預你唔會再加多2次咯喎，咁即係唔會加到500至525啦。咁我話究竟係市場問題啊，定係你問題啊？佢而家個問題就係想問佢呢樣嘢。
I'm not particularly concerned about the divergence, no, because it is largely due to the market's expectation that inflation will move down more quickly. I think that's the bigger part of that. So again, as I just mentioned, our forecasts, different participants have different forecasts, but generally those forecasts are for continued subdued growth, some softening in the labor market, but not a recession, and we have inflation moving down.
嗱，佢暫時講到呢度咧，就第一樣就係佢第一咁佢 as Fed 嗰邊咧，其實佢就唔會 concern market 嗰度啲人點樣諗嘅。咁 market 有佢哋嘅 projection 啦，咁 Fed 有自己嘅 consideration 啦。咁佢自己咧就總之都係講話，我哋會睇住啲數據去做翻佢應該做嘅嘢。咁我話佢就會，但係佢咧就想個市場緩和呢個 inflation 之餘咧，佢哋係唔會見到個 recession 嘅。咁我話佢重複咗2次啱啱同連續。係啦，咁我而家繼續聽埋落去。
Into the somewhere in the mid-3s or maybe lower than that this year. We'll update that in March, but that's what we thought in December. Markets are past that. They show inflation coming down in some cases much quicker than that. So we'll just have to see. And we have a different view, it's a different forecast really. Given our outlook, I don't see us cutting rates this year if our outlook turns true. as I mentioned just now, if we do see inflation coming down much more quickly, that'll play into our policy setting, of course.
Hi, Chair Powell. Scott Horsley from NPR. One of the changes in the statement this month is that the committee is no longer listing public health as among the data points you'll consider in assessing conditions. What should we make of that? Does the Federal Reserve no longer see the pandemic as weighing on the economy?
That's the general sense of it. Look, we understand, I personally understand well that COVID is still out there, but that it's no longer playing an important role in our economy. And, we've kept that statement in there for quite a while, and I think we knew we would take it out at some point. There's never a perfect time, but we thought that, people are handling it better, and the economy and the society are handling it better now. It doesn't really need to be in in the Fed's monthly or post-meeting statement as an ongoing economic risk, as opposed to a health issue.
Nancy. Hi, Chair Powell. Nancy Marshall-Genzer with Marketplace. Wanted to go back to another thing that Fed Vice Chair Lael Brainerd said recently. She said she doesn't see signs of a wage price spiral. And I'm wondering if you agree with that.
I do. Yeah, I do. You don't see that yet, but the whole point is, once you see it, you have a serious problem. That means that effectively in people's decision making, inflation has become a really salient issue, and once that happens, that's what we can't allow to happen. And so that's why we worry that the longer we're at this, and the longer people are talking about inflation all day long, every day, the more risk of something like that. But no, there's not much. It's more of a risk. It always has been more of a risk than anything else. By the way, I think it's becoming less salient, and people are, we pick that up in conversations, and I've seen some data too that show people are, gradually, they're glad that inflation's coming down. People really don't like inflation, and as we see it coming down, that could also add a boost to economic activity. You look at the sentiment surveys now, and they're very, very low. With 3.5% unemployment and high wage increases nominally by historical standards, why can that be? It has to be inflation, right? So I think once inflation is seen to be coming down in coming months, even, you will also see a boost to sentiment, I hope.
So that's what you're looking at most closely is consumer expectations.
That's at the very heart. It's consumers and businesses. Essentially, we believe that expectations of future inflation are a very important part of the process of creating inflation. That's a sort of a bedrock belief. In one way or another, it has to be. We think it's important. And in this case, I would say the risk 8 months ago or so, longer-term inflation expectations had moved up. We moved quite vigorously last year. Expectations seem to be well anchored, including at the shorter end now, not just the longer end. So it's, and I think that's very reassuring. I think, the markets have decided and the public has decided that inflation is going to come back down to 2%, and it's just a matter of us following through. That's immeasurably helpful to the process of getting inflation down. The fact that people now do generally believe that it will come down, that'll be part of the process of getting it down, and it's a very positive thing.
頭先啱講咗個好得意嘅經濟現象，其實我唔記得咗嗰陣時讀經濟嘅時候呢個 term 有冇個專有名詞啊？佢就係講話咧，當所有人都 believe 一個 inflation 會 come down 嘅時候咧，其實個 inflation 就真係會 come down，因為當你 believe 個 inflation 會降低啦，咁嘅話你預期就係咁我唔會買嘢住噶嘛，因為佢 inflation 會降低啲嘢會平啲嘛。咁就係因為大家都一齊咁樣諗嘅時候，咪會減少個消費，所以個 inflation 咪個 demand 咪會減低，之後令到個 inflation 會降低。佢啱講嘅就係呢個，我唔記得咗有冇一個 term 係講呢樣嘢，但係呢個係一個讀經濟嘅時候，我記得有 cover 過呢樣嘢嘅。
Thank you, Chair Powell. Greg Ropp from MarketWatch. In the minutes of the December meeting, there was a couple sentences that struck people as important. When the committee said participants talked about this unwarranted easing of financial conditions was a risk, and it would make your life harder to bring inflation down. I haven't heard you talk much about that today or in the statement, so I was wondering, has that concern eased among members, or is that still something you're concerned about? Thank you.
I would put it this way, it's something that we monitor carefully. Financial conditions didn't really change much from the December meeting to now. They mostly went sideways or up and down, but came out in roughly the same place. It's important that the markets do reflect the tightening that we're putting in place. As we've discussed a couple times here, there's a difference in perspective by some market measures on how fast inflation will come down. We're just going to have to see. I mean, I'm not going to try to persuade people to have a different forecast. But our forecast is that it will take some time and some patience, and that we'll need to keep rates higher for longer. But we'll see.
嗱，佢呢度咧就問都係市場同你個 projection 唔同，咁之後佢都係答翻就係話，佢哋總之而家 Fed 嘅睇法都係佢哋要 keep rate higher for longer，即係總之佢哋都要 keep 住呢個高嘅 interest rate 啊，佢哋而家嘅數據啊，或者佢哋而家嘅睇法係咁樣。
Hi, Chair Powell. Brendan Peterson with Punchbowl News. I wanted to ask if the Fed takes into account at all the debt ceiling when it comes to quantitative tightening, given the fact that rapid or faster quantitative tightening could bring us closer faster to that drop-dead debt ceiling deadline. Could it play an effect as we get closer to that drop-dead deadline this summer?
It's very hard to think about all the different possible ramifications, and I think the answer is basically I don't think there's likely to be any important interaction between the two, because I believe Congress will wind up acting, and as it will and must in the end, to raise the debt ceiling in a way that doesn't risk the progress we're making against.
呢個總之又係問佢 debt ceiling 嗰度，咁 Fed 嗰度有冇啲咩可以做到啊？如果真係 approach 個 deadline， 咁之後 Powell 都同佢講，呢個都係 Congress 嘅問題，即係同頭先頭嗰幾個問題一樣啦，都係有問過類似嘅嘢。咁我都唔明點解佢再問多次啊。
For example, the Treasury General account will shrink down and then it will grow back up, and we understand there'll be lots of flows between there and the overnight repo facility and reserves. We understand all that. We're watching it carefully. We'll just be monitoring it. Thank you very much.
好，咁呢度就完咗㗎啦。咁啊。好啦，咁今日講我哋一陣個市之前咧，我想同大家講咧，呢個係 Yahoo Finance 個 channel。咁咧，其實我覺得你哋有興趣咧，其實你可以十咗佢，或者你揀咗去睇下。其實佢咧講嗰啲唔同嘅業績啊、分析啊等等咧，佢有好多嘢睇嘅。你見我成日 forward 咧個 YouTube 咧，都係佢哋嗰個 YouTube 嚟嘅。咁其實我覺得佢哋呢個真係多 finance news 睇嘅 YouTube， 而且佢哋講啲嘢我覺得幾中立，所以幾中肯啦，亦都係。所以我覺得大家係可以睇呢個嘅。好，咁之後睇下你有冇問題啦，我就行一行開先，去咗去洗手間先。 不過其實頭先佢成個 conference 咧，我而家聽第2次啦，今朝我睇咗1次之後啱陪咁啊啱大家一齊睇多次啦。其實我覺得佢咧由頭到尾咧都冇放鴿嘅，其實佢好鷹嘅，我覺得就因為其實有幾樣嘢佢堅持咗啦。第一就係佢仲有2次加息啦，呢樣嘢其實佢 confirm 得好犀利㗎啦。第二樣咧就係佢今年內會減息，佢係見唔到嘅呢樣嘢。咁我唔明，咁我話市場就好似頭先有2個記者都問啦，市場同你嘅 projection 完全係唔同，咁你點睇？咁佢都係話，咁我話 Fred 都係堅持翻自己嘅。咁但係你要知道一樣嘢就係，而家邊個話事先 ？Fred 先係加息嗰個嚟㗎嘛？喂，軒你講嗰樣自我實現預言嗰樣，好似就係呢個 term 啊 ，Thank you，應該係你啱啊。黃金咧 ，by the way 頭先講話出咗 jobless claim 啊，continuous jobless claim 啊，non-farm product 嗰啲數據啦，咁之後個市啊再飆多一段上去嘅。咁啊，而家睇睇圖啦，咁我哋睇睇黃金先啦。嗱，黃金大圖我哋就呢張 post 完就 post 完就 post 㗎，咁話大家都知究竟呢啲線點樣嚟㗎啦而家。咁咧，如果你問黃金咧，我唔知點解咧，我個 group 啦，同Discord 啦，或者我 private message 啦，都好多人問我係咪要沽。咁啊，其實如果你睇 M15啦，嗱 M 而家係咁樣啦，如果 M15咧就更加易睇啦。佢其實一穿呢度咧，其實可以追盤嘅。佢呢度再 back test 多一次添。如果你睇 M5或者 M3咧，呢條上影應該好靚。咁如果咁我其實如果你話我係一個短炒嘅人咧，呢一下咧係沽得嘅。咁我話你可以睇住呢啲位沽啦。咁呢度俾多一次位啦。咁我唔知你有冇啦。咁但係咧，我自己比較渴望咧。嗱，我放大少少啊。其實我咧自己比較希望咧去到1981上邊，即係大約咧去到呢啲位啦，可能1985左右呢啲位，我先至去做倉嘅。我自己比較想咁樣嘅。之後你連續問幾隻，我就睇咗 SQ 先啦。SQ 就我哋喺1月頭嗰時講過啦，咁就而家行咗1個月。咁當時我哋就係話，如果佢 back 呢條線就會再上啊嘛。咁我哋其實嗰陣時其實一直都係講啊，其實你會見個 target 就會係大約86.7咯。咁我話而家佢爭少到啦。咁啊 P， 等先啊，唔係睇錯咗。其實我哋個目標其實大約係87.2左右啊嘛。咁而家都86.7啦，86.8添啦。如果 P market 咁差唔多到啦。 其實咧講起呢個差唔多到咧，我想話，不論我哋之前講 Amazon 啦，咁我哋 Amazon 咧都真係講完又講啊，過咗102，我哋會睇81左右啊嘛。咁其實而家都P-market 已經證而家又到埋。之後 NVDA 啦，NVDA 我哋講話，即係如果佢呢度 backtest 咗，咁佢穿唔到呢度，好大機會上下一個大阻力就係220啊。咁話佢而家就一支就飆咗去啦，其實都唔夠5% 就到啦。咁但係其實對呢啲股嚟講，呢啲係一日就行到嘅嘢咯。咁或者你求其睇下 Ford 呢啲股啊，三底行咗，咁之後而家咁如果你用足身嘅話，條線就係咁啦。咁如果你用影線呢，條線就係咁樣啦。咁其實不論如何，佢都穿咗呢度啦。咁如果你話我想睇頸線嘅，咁頸線就係喺大約呢啲位啊嘛。OK， 咁我而家去 test 緊頸線啦。佢呢個頸線就大約14啊嘛。佢而家其實上咗頸線少少啦，都係喺呢啲位 console 緊啦。咁我推高少少去到呢度啦。咁我都係喺呢度掙扎緊咯。咁我話其實呢度係有對稱埋呢個位噶嘛，大約呢啲位啦。咁我話如果佢再飆上，其實都好硬。其實而家好多股咧都係喺好大嘅位嗰度咯。咁你係咪都問 Tesla 啊？咁我講咗先啦，自己去。咁我話 Tesla 下一關總之就係200蚊。咁我話你會見到咧 group 裏面好多師兄都話 long call 緊200啦。咁我話。我唔知佢係睇邊個位啦，但係我諗正常人都係睇呢兩個位出嚟講咯。其實 SP500 就而家下一個阻力咧就喺4190左右啊嘛。咁我如果佢穿到4190就4300左右嗰啲位啦，就到。咁你話而家究竟佢大唔大機會？哇！呢個真係好難答你，真係。其實咧，因為而家其實成個市咧，你睇幾樣嘢啊嘛。第一就係琴日議息啦。咁其實琴日議息嘅結果咧，我自己又覺得係好鷹嘅，就唔係好夾。咁當然呢個係我自己 bias 啊。咁市場就總之琴日就升咗上去。咁第二樣聽日今晚啦，你就會出幾隻最大嘅股嘅 ER 噶嘛 ，which 就係等先揾翻圖啊等等。which 係 Amazon 啦、蘋果啦、Alphabet 啦，咁啱講嘅 Ford 都有啦。咁我話頭呢三隻其實dominate咗納指差唔多20% 以上嘅市值噶嘛嘅股份啦，應該話。咁好啦，咁即係今晚出呢三隻嘢就係第二關啦。咁第三關就係聽日嘅飛龍啦。咁其實如果三關都爆上嘅，咁其實乜嘢都打點上邊4300都隨時穿埋啦，就會即係如果三關佢都過到，咁我自己係咁睇咯。所以呢幾日你見到我都按兵不動，完全唔想做嘢。即係如果你今日過咗關，即係如果今晚 過多關，你可能去到4243之後，再盤前飛龍高一谷咁4300啦已經。哇 ！ADM 呢啲咁冷門嘅，你居然會問嘅喂？先。ADM 嗰陣時，我哋講話，會唔會 backtest 翻去90啊？90啊，最好開股點樣爭少少啊？咁我話佢唔想啊，一定會對翻我底呢度噶啦。咁佢好啦，打穿埋之後 backtest，而家再落翻去。咁其實而家佢大約係喺呢啲裂口位嗰度啦。OK， 或者呢啲位承托緊啦。咁其實呢個位最低都係80個半啫嘛。咁我話你預計佢80個半呢啲位點都會形成多一次彈多一次啊。咁就算不論如何都好，佢呢啲位可能會彈多去83個3左右咯。但我諗你識問 ADM， 你應該係睇咗我哋一段時間，應該好少人會無端問呢啲嘢。我望下隻 MSGM 先。我唔知佢今日會唔會散場，好搞笑喎！佢咧呢隻嘢升嘅時候咧，佢帶挈咗另一隻嘢，佢帶挈咗叫 MGAM 嘅嘢喎。咁呢隻 MGAM 咧，又係唔知咩嚟啊！總之就係又係跟住嗰一日一嘢爆咗上去，又係爆咗4-5倍啦。由1蚊上咗去4個6之後咁樣回翻落嚟。其實我懷疑係因為呢兩隻似名，所以就互相牽引咗上去。呢啲好明顯都係垃圾股嚟。Meta 唔識答你喎，佢夾到咁樣唔識睇佢下一步係點樣。之前我哋噏過幾次嗰隻 AI， 最後一嘢補完裂口咁樣爆咗上去，又係完全冇得追嘅嘢嚟。其實佢最簡單啫嘛，我哋之前呢條阻力線我哋上次畫噶啦，咁我一嘢就去咗下一個阻力啦。咁話有啲咩好講嘅真係，呢啲你冇嘢睇到啦。不過講起琴日好彩咯，即係。我喺唔知147左右沽嘅，咁之後就153左右就 cut 咗啦。咁其實輸咗5個半定6蚊左右啦。咁之後我哋其實 short put 咗140啊。咁short put 140咧，嗰陣時我哋開個價係4個幾嘅。咁啊，其實 overall 成個 trade 啊，因為佢又咁好彩啦。總之我嗰陣時定咗就152個半要走嘅，咁啊最後走咗啦。咁如果佢琴日其實如果打唔到我個位咧，其實我就冇差唔多40蚊啊會，所以其實真係死好命真係，而家淨係輸咗1蚊。RKLBQ4，其實佢啲股咧賺幾多輸幾多咧，都其實個 market 都大約估到啦，因為其實佢有幾多個任務就係幾多個任務噶啦嘛。咁其實咧有一次咧，我聽呢個 press conference 講咧，其實係佢哋個記者會啦。其實 RKLB 嗰啲記者會咧真係要聽，你好多嗰啲行內嘢聽到。 我嗰陣時咧，即係我唔知道火箭行業點收錢啊。佢就有講嘅，其實咧原來咧佢哋每一次 launching 咧喺 launch 之前咧，其實已經收咗90%嘅錢㗎啦，最少都會收咗90%嘅錢，即係分批俾嘅，即係可能你同佢講話學我2025年要飛嘅訂嚿嘢嘅。咁其實咧我當你而家23年啦，咁啊其實呢2年咧已經分批要不停咁俾錢佢㗎啦。咁啊俾到咧飛之前其實已經俾咗90%幾嘅錢㗎啦，基本上佢已經收足錢先俾你飛嘅。咁不論成功與否咧，其實佢哋都唔使嘔翻俾個客，因為其實呢個係客 bear 嘅 risk 嚟啊。OK， 咁所以其實你話佢個業績係點啊咁樣？咁我話嗱，我唔知你識唔識會計啊。咁咧其實會計你要 book 落 revenue 咧，總之佢要 deliver 咗個 service 咧，佢先可以 book 落 revenue， 即係話佢嗰個發射真係發生咗先可以啦。咁其實Q4 咧，你睇到究竟佢有冇嘢 delay 咗噶嘛？即係佢係得美國嗰個任務由上年 delay 咗去今年。咁其實呢個市場全部人都知啊。咁其實你要派先嘅咪派先晒咯，都係嗰句。咁我話其實呢啲行業咧好透明嘅，佢賺幾多輸幾多，你個 market 好易估到佢賺幾多輸幾多，啲 contract 又講晒出嚟咁滯嘅。咁所以我覺得其實乜嘢都預計咗。咁你話佢出 ER 會唔會升啊？咁樣其實佢之前幾次出親 ER 都係會升一升嘅。咁但係你之後究竟佢如果佢真係大爆發嘅，即係可能升成10幾20% 嘅，就次次都係 short 佢好時機咯，調翻轉。股價向上爆炸，真係。不過如果俾我咧，我覺得我就會做呢股嘅 short put 嘅，就係咁啦。好，咁而家開咗市啦，咁就咧，我哋睇到不論 SP500啦，其實睇到都得。係喎，你冇透明喎。Anyway，咁啊。不論 SP500啦，納指啦，都係升緊嘅。不過你如果見到道指咧，道指就係對緊落去嘅，即係 negative 緊嘅，應該係。睇先嚇，啲道指先。因為我發覺我呢個 trading view 未落現，等一等先。唔怪得知啦，咁奇怪，明明我睇到啲嘢跌緊嘅，等一陣先啊。我落現翻個 trading view 先。唔怪得知啦，明明見到道指應該係咁跌緊噶嘛。 睇完牛牛先。好，抌走張小丑圖，加大我哋可以睇翻啲圖嘅 area 先。係好，入翻嚟正常模啦而家。其實我最在意嘅係羅素咯，即係咁多指數之中，因為羅素應該係喺呢個加息週期受嘅影響，我諗佢應該大過納指嘅，因為佢啲公司實在太過弱雞。咁但係其實佢已經截咗兩個位啊，而家去緊第3個位。咁樣話爽啦，過埋我哋而家目標8日添啦。咁話嗰陣時我哋咧講過就係話。嗰陣時我哋講過，如果穿咗大約98嗰啲位，你要走啊。咁而家佢冇可能啊，而家彈咗咁上。咁我話其實如果正常咧，係一個 swing trader 的話咧，你基本上可以推到去呢啲可能106啊嗰啲位先至好走咯。你可能俾位佢會唔會再飛上去120咯？咁今晚都 ER 啦。另外咧，蘋果咧，其實應該就係其中一隻最多人睇死佢 ER 唔得嘅。咁我話咁多人睇死佢唔得咧，又搞到我唔想睇死佢。咁但係如果蘋果得嘅話咧，就基本上都冇乜嘢可以整死呢個指數。如果我哋用足身睇咧，其實佢又係 form 咗個勁靚嘅 breakup 咯，因為佢咁啊 ，OK。之後呢度經過 backtest， 而家一夜彈上嚟，咁其實又係我哋之前交代過好多次嘅呢個形態啦。即係如果唔係因為 ER 嘅關係咧，我90%都會講就係話佢可能會睇155啊嗰啲位。咁但係因為佢 ER 啦，ER 冇嘢好估噶嘛。咁我話咪如果就咁睇嘅話，佢個 range 係155啊，同埋140啊呢啲位。呢啲會係佢彈到嘅 range， 我自己覺得會係。咁但係 ER 真係冇有估啦，係咪？我想問咧，今日個聲咧會唔會好過琴日好多咧？如果係嘅話，我就以後用呢個 setting， 應該就好咗啲嘅。 或者我朋友極度推薦睇呢條 OpenAI 嘅片，咁我而家擺咗喺科學園呢個新科幻知識介紹嗰度，你中意可以自己睇下。聽講係超強大功能，大家都用到嘅嘢，但係我未睇。話時話我哋咧喺呢度開咗個飲食台，亦都咁。如果你係中意揾嘢食啊等等嗰啲咧，你係可以歡迎去呢度間中 po 晒你中意嘅嘢食啦。咁我如果得閒諗起或者我最近食過嘅嘢咧，我都會劈喺度同你講話，有咩值得試啊？有咩係我覺得係嗰個 menu 上 OK 嘅嘢，咁我會寫喺度。咁係一個非常中肯嘅一個評價嚟嘅，係我自己食過啲咩我先會寫嘅。咁我亦都會問下人啦，喂，如果我 book 台 book 呢啲好唔好？咁但係暫時未人理我。咁之後就你哋如果中意，即係如果你話食嗰啲咩想推介嘅，你哋都可以咧跟翻我哋個格式啦。咁你下邊你可以睇我呢兩個 example 啦，點樣寫啦。即係我覺得統一格式大家易睇啲啊嘛啲嘢。咁我話如果我例如 search hashtag 食嘢嘅咁樣 ，right？ 咁我就可以揾到有啲咩人 post 咗啲咩餐廳出嚟咁樣咯，係咪？咁就易揾好多咯，即刻。睇睇今日到底盤前有啲咩業績開咗先。又去我哋 Discord。咁睇睇大圖先嚇。等呢啲，你冇乜一啲特別觸動到我神經嘅公司，咁我話睇下個大報價表先嗱。咁咧我哋除咗嗰個格仔表啦，咁每日咧，例如好啦，一張咧就係 after the close。after the close 呢個係講緊咩嘅咧？呢個咧就係講緊等等嚇。嗱 ，after the close 咧呢一張咧就係講緊我哋昨日收市後究竟有啲咩業績出咗。咁我話呢度就一次過列晒公司名啦，個 ticker 啦，即係個代號啦。咁之後就 actual 係乜嘢，咁 projected 嘅係乜嘢咁樣，上年係乜嘢。咁我話 year to year 嘅 revenue 係幾多。咁呢個表咧就一次過列晒出嚟噶。咁呢個係琴日 after the close 嘅。咁呢個咧就係 before the bell 嘅。咁就即係我哋今日嘅盤前出咗啲乜嘢咁樣。sorry， 呢張都係 after the close 嘅。今朝盤前嗰張未 update。再問嘢之前，我揦一揦究竟而家大約點樣行先。其實我真係唔明點解 Trading View 咧唔可以做到咧，好似牛咁咧，有張細嘅線圖喺度。其實我覺得有張細嘅線圖喺左邊咧，真係好幫到手。頭先師兄話沽金嗰班應該係已經發咗達啦，而家。 同埋一樣嘢我百思不得其解。嗱 Bitcoin 就日線係咁樣啦，你會見到其實佢喺22,700啦，去到23,700、23,800啦，最後呢位 range 緊啦。但係咧，其實咧隻 coin 咧呢兩日咧係癲咗升到，其實係咪有啲咩新聞啫？其實佢有啲咩新聞令到佢連續2日都可以10% 咁升上去咧？不嬲都係㗎啦，你股票你唔係興趣嚟㗎嘛？股票你只係一個攞嚟揾錢嘅 tools 嚟嘅啫，仲要揾錢嘅 tools 之餘咧，佢仲有機會令到你輸錢添。你話呢個係咪非常之唔受歡迎嘅一樣嘢？係咪先？即係其實我諗冇人係中意呢樣嘢㗎嘛。即係你中意佢，因為你賺錢嗰時你中意佢嘅啫，你唔係輸錢嗰時中意佢啊嘛。即係你有機會唔中意佢啦，係咪先？係咪好精警咧？咁但係你食嘢人好中意食㗎，你總有嗱。咁當然啦，可能有啲嘢對食物係冇乜要求嘅，有啲人係咁，但係呢樣係我其中一個興趣咯，就係咁。哇 ！Beyond Meat 其實都爆得好勁，我周線台其實咧，而家真係啲垃圾股咧，全部都整咗個圓底，而家全部 pop 緊上去。哇！真係，其實真係如果 pop 到咁樣，真係有咩可能追到咧？真係啲嘢。U 同 SoFi，U 我成日睇啊，嗱 U 真係唔好話我冇講嘅，真係其實 U 呢隻嘢真係已經係講到口臭之一嚟嘅，又係嗱。我哋之前講藍色啊嘛，咁之後，總之一出藍色就去到呢度41啊、42左右呢位啊，咁到咗啦而家。咁當然啦，我唔會話。其實你話到咗咁係咪真係分析得好好咧？咁樣其實我已經覺得唔係，而家咁成個市咁樣嘭嘭聲咁上去咧，關技術咩事啊？而家根本你買乜嘢都贏噶啦，係咪先？咁總之睇下佢會唔會去到66咯，年尾。我好睇一睇埋個 SoFi 先。話至於 SoFi，我哋 group 裏面有個師兄佢係好中意 SoFi 嘅。哇！佢而家應該係非常興奮嘅狀態。不過而家都到咗啲大阻力啊！講真，即係就算連啲垃圾股都到咗阻力，你唔好俾佢知道我話佢係嗰啲垃圾股添，真係。其實就算 U 呢都係第一步阻力啦，你冇理由話呢個先係啊！而家係啊，而家係第一步阻力。 send 少嘢去會員區嗰度先，等等。嗱，如果我哋 member， 你應該有啲嘢 send 咗出嚟，你自己去睇睇。頭先我哋噏咗 F 咁啊，嗱，我自己對呢隻我係完全唔中意呢隻嘢，不過 anyway， 話時話呢個廢車三寶而家點樣？睇睇先。其實都係真係得理想係比較好啊 ，Neo 同小鵬都係一時爆發，但係理想咧，因為個背景嘅關係咧，應該係一隻比較長遠都係贏嘅嘢嚟。VIX 我會繼續揸。Amazon 喂，其實調翻轉你諗下 Amazon， 如果嗱佢而家升咗4.5% 啊嘛，其實一開始嗰陣時升咗6-7% 噶嘛，其實佢唔會先離譜啦，係嘛？講真，其實講食可以煮埋嘢食，其實我都有諗過係講煮嘢食。其實我煮嘢食真係唔係咁打，我諗我煮嘢食可能好過呢個一半嘅人啊！我想話，如果有機會，我都想拍煮嘢食。我屋企有獨立廚房㗎，有閂門嘅。我同你講，我獨立廚房係閂門之餘，仲有個工作平台啊，着火都可以開門，等啲煙飛出街嗰種嚟嘅，好巴閉嘅。有3個爐頭添啊！我同你講，一個 gas 爐，2個係電磁爐嘅。RUT 你等下 RUT。我哋之前講嘅 DKNG 咧，我知道有啲師兄入咗嘅，咁話你比較易睇咧，就肯定係呢兩個觸頂呢位啦。而家係咪？咁佢大約喺呢位徘徊緊啦。咁話如果你一日揸緊 DKNG 嘅人啊，你會唔希望佢穿到呢啲位咯？即係呢一紮呢三支觸頂啊，你會唔希望佢穿到佢咯？咁話如果你話 put 唔 put 啊咁樣啦，呢股我就唔會啦。講完之後，你咁中意講指數名，唔講期指個名喎，真係。我而家扯咗上嚟啊嘛，咁話下一步就係呢個2032左右嗰個位咯，睇下先啊。呢度 high 係咯，2032、2033個位咯。講下佢其實個 support 係喺 嗱呢個 support 咧好 weak 嘅，但係 support 咧就係1974。咁如果佢穿咗啦，我當佢回落嚟啦，咁可能你會預佢回到1937左右嗰啲位咯。咁我話其實你玩緊嘅1937 versus 呢個2040嗰個 range。不過羅素咁樣升法真係超過咗我預期，我完全冇 expect 佢咁樣行法。咁 MTTR 咧，亦都係一隻我名單上嘅嘢嚟，咁又係做咗大圓底咁而家白運上嚟。話時話睇下呢個亞木系先，真係好耐冇望過佢啲嘢，真係。所以話咧，其實啲垃圾股咧，即係亞木系嗰啲，全部都係啦，係咪先？全部都係 set up 咗個大圓底，而家衝緊上去，全部都好同步啊！真係。其實如果你話 RUT1000 好似係最大嗰1000隻嚟噶嘛，咁我不如睇 SP500。同埋其實你 RUT1000你係會炒 RUT1000啦，定係點樣？即係我都好好奇，想問下。呢隻 RDW 咧，其實係做好多太空上用嘅硬件，即係啲衛星嗰啲儀器啊。咁佢唔係做得衛星喎，佢係做衛星用嗰啲儀器啊、火箭用嘅儀器啊等等嗰啲嘢。咁但係因為佢咧上年定前年 SPAC 上市啦，咁咧佢呢嘢插落嚟咧係搞乜鬼咧？同埋呢嘢插落嚟係咩咧？就係嗰陣時咧佢出 ER 嘅時候，佢 suppose 出 ER 嘅時候咧，佢出唔到。咁即係點解啊？佢話 accounting problem 一直拖，就搞到咁嘅樣。所以其實咧買啲 SPAC 咧，即係除咗呢個佢本身就叫 overrated 啦，即係佢上得市佢一定係估高咗個價噶嘛。咁啊，另外就係你都要佢 company management 係好重要。有一隻咧，我有一排有講嘅叫做 TTCF 啦。咁呢 Tattoo Chef 咧就係佢做啲叫做即係全植物，即係佢做齋嘅，佢係咁我話佢又做到好靚，同埋啲嘢咧，我睇好多 YouTuber 啊，或者好多普通嘅人啦，或者我識嗰啲美國嘅朋友咧，都話呢隻嘢係好好食嘅，同埋咧長期上架咧都係會好快俾人掃晒佢啲嘢食係。咁啊，好啦，問題嚟啦，第一佢又係咁樣懟落嚟。咁除咗 SPAC overrated 啦，個市大跌啦，咁呢啲會同步影響佢之外咧，最大問題咧就係咧，佢本身咧係一個家族生意嚟。咁咧佢家族生意嘅人咧就唔係好識管理上市公司啊。咁啊，佢嗰啲 accountant 嗰啲咧，佢係炒完一個又一個啦 ，finance 炒完一個又一個啦，總之就係唔合呢個上市規則嗰啲嘢啦，總之搞唔掂上市規則嘅 account 啦。咁啊，所以佢係換咗好多 accountant，咁啊導致咧佢嗰啲數咧好似改完又改，改完又改，咁啊最後搞成而家咁樣。咁同埋因為佢家族生意嘅關係啦，咁佢上市咧攞咗筆資金咧，就好似喺 Mexico 嗰度咧，定 New Mexico 嗰度咧，咁起咗新廠嘅。咁嗰個廠咧好似又話咧有啲管理上嘅問題出咗嚟，即係一開始又好好嘅，轉個頭過咗4-5個月啦，就開始話有啲人報佢管理有問題啦，咁就 咁就一直而家變咗咁啦個股價。即係 ASTS 就 Space Mobile 啦，嗰陣時就話佢會同SpaceX 嗰個 Starlink 啊嗰啲合作啊成咁樣嘅。咁呢隻嘢咧係經常都超爆大波幅嘅，唔知點解。咁總之而家你會見到阻力同 support 就係咁。咁 anyway， 其實本身咧我想試下學炒呢隻嘢，不過喺我想學嘅時候佢就出現咗呢件事，之後就令我 back off 咗。UEC 係講油嘅 ，URA 都係啦 ，URA 就係個ETF 嚟嘅。咁近期油咧，其實個升勢就出咗嚟嘅。咁唔知佢會升到邊度或者點？但係咧，相信咧，佢呢啲位咧會有啲阻力喺度。OK， 咁佢係 ETF 啦。咁裏邊咧，我覺得如果你中意短炒咧，比較好炒一隻係 UEC。咁其實你見到大 range 喺度啦，而家收窄緊。咁我相信啲 range 開嘅都係會繼續 range， 好難咁樣一嘢又爆上去。OK。咁呢啲股咧，你話買正股好啦，千祈唔好玩權。咁我嗰陣時咧玩過權嘅，咁咧我係做咗啲咩咧？我係大概喺呢啲位啦，3蚊咁樣啦 ，call 佢唔知5蚊嘅權啦。當時佢去到6個幾咁都賺唔到乜錢嘅，因為本身啲 spread 太闊。咁你想走又冇得走，買嘅時候你又買得貴，就係咁。所以其實我成日覺得啲細股啦，你係唔需要買佢嘅權，除非你係 leap 佢啦，即係之後就可能現到 money 現咗成幾蚊雞咁樣，即係可能現咗20-30% 咁樣，咁話你就可以諗買權。咁但係否則咧，呢啲咁細嘅股咧，你買正股咧，佢都俾到20-30% 嘅波幅你咧，咁你冇乜需要買權。Fubo 呢隻咧，我係完全唔知呢隻係咩嚟嘅，咁話我淨係可以用 TA 嘅方式去睇嘅啫。咁最簡單就係本身有個單窗啦，收窄嘅單窗啦，咁而家破咗啦，咁過咗去啦呢樣嘢。咁好啦，第一 support 呢個係第一 support 啦，咁我而家過咗噶啦。咁而家第二嚿係咩啊？呢度咯。咁你會見到，不論呢3支竹啦，同呢支竹啦，都係去到呢度。咁而家佢上咗去咁縮翻入嚟啦，咁證明咗呢個係 valid 嘅，佢亦都 respect 呢樣嘢。OK， 好啦，咁第3個位會係咩咧？究竟係呢個啊，定係會用呢個咧？咁我話呢個近少少，我哋用呢個。咁大概呢位咯。咁如果你話我睇竹身嘅，咁我可能會喺呢度。咁我話你係一關一關咁上去。咁但係佢再上要睇佢點樣爆啦。咁話佢睇下先，佢係11月 ER， 咁即係佢都差唔多有 ER 咯，應該係咪啊？睇下先嚇。係咯，咁而家佢大概咁嘅情況，我唔知答唔答到你想我答嘅嘢。我喺大學係讀math 同 econ double major。 其實三大指數之中咧，係得道指咧最 respect 而家最 respect 佢自己個走勢嘅，我自己覺得係。咁佢而家仲係極度尊重呢個 range 啦。咁我相信 console 完之後咧，就係會冧翻落去。即係呢個繼續係我嘅 bias 嘅 belief 啦。咁而家最主要就係納指而家突然間谷得好勁啊！咁本身之前其實 SP500 升咧就係靠道指去谷噶嘛。其實對翻呢圖，即係佢呢段扯佢上去，扯咗500上去啊嘛。咁嗰陣時 NQ 冇發力啦，而家就接力到 NQ 發力扯下500上去。咁所以唔知道究竟之後冧嘅話，會係道指冧完之後到納指再拖冧呢個SP500，會唔會咁樣？反而 Tesla 都好力啦，咁樣裂口4-5% 上去啲格嗰度，玩到去中間，同埋好衰㗎。佢喺正呢啲又係阻力同 support 中間咧，佢唔俾你喺度諗任何嘢咯，真係。就係如果拉個黃金比率出嚟睇下啦，嗱你都睇唔到嘢啊，其實係咪先？咁如果我用呢個鑽石頂做頂嘅咁樣，咁話佢係啱過0.618咯。咁但係都好勉強啊啲位，因為你見到佢好多嗰啲其他嗰啲主要位置嘅線啦，其實冇乜阻力同support 噶嘛。咁即係話其實呢個黃金比率佢都冇睇過黃金比率啦，行嘅時候，咁所以冇用。哇！put 金嘅有福了啊，真係。咦？如果係咁嘅話，我哋睇埋呢個 DXY 喎，可以睇下先。終於佢掂到呢個底，終於就而家彈翻少上嚟。咁去翻呢一站磨位嗰度。咁即係去翻。咁有機會去翻102啊！咁如果佢突破到呢站磨位咧，上得翻去103.6左右，咁嘅話佢啲指數就應該真係會回翻去下邊啦。ES 頭先講完啱，講多次啦。總之而家都係之前我哋嘅阻力就4100啊嘛，結果啱週末嗰條片都係講4100嘅玩，咁就而家咧琴日儲局講完嘢啦，今日穿咗上去啦，咁而家再出緊支陽燭啦，暫時。咁話佢暫時仲 respect 緊4188。即係啲陰燭頂嗰度，即係大約睇下先啊，4180嗰啲位咯。咁佢話佢而家都仲尊重緊嘅。 係咪？即係呢幾個位，咁我話而家睇下佢會唔會回咯。其實咧，你又變咗 delay 時間，等陣先啊。我唔知解佢今日斷咗2次線喎，等陣先，我 connect 翻先。嗱，總之我而家 suppose 佢個頂係4180左右嘛。OK， 我睇翻 M5先啦，睇下 M15先，等等。OK， 嗱呢啲係冇事嘅時間啦。咁啊，開市之後，琴日就收市大約呢位啊。OK， 咁下邊短10 我預係咁樣啦。咁上邊就係4180嗰個位嘛，咁我會預佢玩呢啲 range 咯。咁呢個係我第一樣睇嘅嘢啦。第二樣咁我睇細啲咯，睇冇啲特別嘢先。嗱，你見到呢啲咧有一啲叫一堆嘢嘅位啦，咁啊 support 係多力支持啊。咁去到呢個位其實佢都係 respect 呢度呢扎嘢噶嘛，即係有。OK， 咁呢扎嘢係 valid 噶啦。咁我話你會睇呢個位，呢個位係 valid 噶。咁如果再睇細啲嘅話，你睇下會唔會再有啲嘢睇到咯？去到1分鐘啦，咁話會係咁樣啦，咁即係而調翻轉上邊呢度，呢啲會係今日嗰啲位咯。之後呢一度佢而家回緊啦，暫時其實佢係對應翻呢度噶嘛。咁如果你要 put 嘅，你而家就要 put 咯。之後你期望嘅話，佢會去到 at least 呢位咯，你會預佢。即係我如果好短，我會咁睇咯。咁好啦，如果佢真係咁話呢度應該 put 啊，咁話佢會去到呢個位啦。咁我話佢而家究竟佢會呢度 bounce 啊，定係佢打穿呢度？問題就喺呢一度，最大問題喺呢一度。OK， 如果你係做淡嘅，咁你做好友嘅，你就基本上你係睇緊佢穿4180噶啦。如果你係做好友嘅人。Tesla 之後走勢，其實我覺得好睇你 ES 啊同埋 SP500回唔回咯，回得幾快咯。如果佢唔回嘅話，咁肯定去200啦，係咪先？咁如果佢拖得低佢嘅，咁咪又係去翻180之後，睇下穿落去就164咯。咁我諗佢其實喺呢啲位玩嘅機會好大咯，之後。但係我唔覺得佢會一嘢就突破到200之後上翻去呢啲位呢，我就覺得難啲咯。即係去到呢粒鑽石頂咁樣，我唔覺得佢短期內有能力做到，因為其實佢已經崩手好快啦嘛。咁同埋呢，其實你睇 Tesla 啊，嗰陣時我哋係咁講話，喂，出大成交，咁之後玩推上去咁樣， 其實你真係要記住出現過呢啲嘢之後，係對成個股做咗個 support 出嚟咯。咁我話如果你第日去到有一日見到有啲股喺頂嗰度做咗啲突然間咁大成交密集式嘅，之後佢又穿唔到再上去嘅，即係呢個 case 係落去啦，佢穿唔到再落去大成交有支持啊。咁你啲嘢要好注意嘅嘢咯，你又知道其實喂應該係可能見到底啦，咁短底啦咁樣咧 at least 係咪？咁你咁話我知道有一啲即係玩開外匯之後玩股票嗰啲人會話成交量冇用嘅咁樣，咁係因為外匯的確冇成交量好睇，但係你如果玩股票期貨同埋期指嘅話咧，你一定要睇成交量咯，呢樣係一個好 critical 嘅一樣嘢嚟。SI SI 咧，其實一直令到我有少少傷心嘅嘢嚟，因為咧喺呢個我記得佢80幾70幾嘅時候，因為我有諗過 put 佢，之後我估唔到佢喺呢個1個月內係可以由60幾去到30，之後去到得返10蚊。呢又係咁啊，冇咗一個可以吹走10年嘅機會。咁好啦，其實呢啲咁嘅圖，你又係見到佢咁樣做咗個底出嚟啦。你用一條線又好，弧形都好，咁我哋都識睇呢個係一個底嚟。咁佢話喺1月就出咗 ER 啦，咁係出 ER 4月啦，即係。咁佢出完呢次 ER 都冇乜嘢，咁佢話其實佢應該係見咗底啦，呢啲嘢就係咪先？咁好啦，佢而家由13彈咗上去。呢度啊，咁你其實都差唔多成90% 啦，升咗。OK，咁佢本身由咁好跌落嚟，升90%唔奇啊。咁我去下一個，即係如果佢突破到呢啲位嘅，真係 OK。咁我話佢會，咁我哋至少會睇去到呢啲咯。之後如果再爆上嘅話，咪去到可能37啊、36。咁但係問題係 SI 呢隻嘢好 depends on crypto 點樣噶嘛，即係佢係一個有少少類似 coin 咁樣，其實你要好睇 crypto 啊嘛。咁我話你會見到近期佢 MSTR 啊嗰啲都回得好快，即係升嘅時候佢有一段小爆發嘅時候，佢就會快過嗰啲 crypto 行法咯。因為你其實啲 shitcoin 即係嗰啲3、4線嗰啲 coin 咧。我知道話爆得好勁嘅，咁啊，但係 BTC 同 ETH 冇乜喐到啦。咁啊，礦場嗰啲其實而家都突然間一堆資金衝翻去炒高佢哋啊。咁我話你成個 sector 升嘛，而家係唔係佢獨立嘅一個嘛？哇 ！Facebook 淨穿埋呢啲位添，哇癲到！頭先仲諗住130試下沽佢正股，之後諗住150就平，都係咁快俾佢打咗。 Silver 機升係咪因為巴克萊買佢啲股啊？就係炒緊呢樣嘢，即係收購佢，買咗啲啫喎，應該係。等陣我睇一睇 news 先。但係其實巴克萊話買 Silvergate， 其實佢買完之後係佔佢成間公司0.11% 嘅啫喎，好少咗其實都。係啊 ，Meta 個 PE 又低啊，但其實 on the other hand 嘅問題係佢元宇宙嗰度燒錢嘅問題啊嘛，其實佢到而家都未解決呢樣嘢㗎。你話佢個 PE 低，其實佢好似都有22啊 PE。即係講真，佢未升之前，等一陣嚇。即係如果你話佢未升之前係佢114嗰啲位，佢嗰陣時 PE 嗰陣時我哋喺 channel 都有講話，哇佢 PE 其實得翻8定咩嘅啫嘛，佢即係佢未出今次 earning 之前，上次 earning 嗰陣時，我記得去到啲位好似都唔過10個 PE， 嗰陣時覺得好誇張，不過嗰陣時完全唔敢買佢，因為仲要覺得應該今年科技股會插咗一鑊嘅咁樣。之後同埋你 Meta 佢點解升啫？佢 buy back 啊嘛，今朝我哋 post 咗喺 channel 嗰度，即係 Discord 嗰度有 post 就係話佢好戇居嘅，佢 lay off 咗幾次噶啦嘛。之後佢出業績嗰陣時，佢再 lay off 多11000人啊嘛。之後 lay off 到夠錢做 buy back 先至而家谷到咁樣。如果佢唔係 buy back，佢邊度升到咁多啫？話呢個 chain 應該係呢2-3年炒股嘅人嚟，問親嗰啲都係呢2-3年嗰啲咁嘅當年嘅股王。PLTR 前嗰排我哋都有講話雪地佬個訪問，咁啊重提一次啦，佢係唯一一個敢喺呢個傳媒面前講話阿普京點解唔會撤兵嘅人。咁啊，佢當時講咩呢？佢就係話第一就係如果普京唔撤兵嘅，咁其實西方就會一直都要焗住去 support 烏克蘭啊，因為要懶晒正義之師啊嘛，即係佢真係用呢啲咁嘅 term 啊，真係你要 pretend 咗一個 freedom fighter 啊，成嗰啲嘢，咁佢唔係用 pretend 啦，我唔記得用個咩 wording， 但係其實都係類似嘅意思。咁第二樣佢就係話普京係唔會撤兵嘅，點解普京唔撤兵？因為俄國嘅皇帝一撤兵係會死人嘅，咁話普京同佢成班親信咧都係會死嘅，如果咁樣打輸仗撤兵嘅話，咁所以呢個亦都係佢唔撤兵嘅理由。OK， 咁張圖好易睇啦，3個人夾落嚟啦，咁之後呢一紮位突破咗啦。如果你想睇得 precise 啲嘅，連個 Factoring Volume 嗰個工具去睇啦。OK， 咁話你會睇到就係頭先嗰條線嗰啲位啦。咁話787左右啊嘛，同我哋頭先畫嗰條線一樣。咁話係嗰啲高成交量嘅位，咁佢突破咗啊嘛，繼續上咯。咁佢而家去到呢度，嗱，你見到而家好多股都好衰啊，去晒啲大阻力位啊，係咪啊？ 全部都係啊，冇一隻唔係嘅。而家即係大部分都係去到一個微妙嘅阻力位嗰度停咗喺度啊。而家咁今日會唔會再突上去？咁唔知啦。OK，Facebook 話瘋狂咁夾咁上去添啦。Tesla 都係啊，仲夾緊啦。咁我話有 put NVIDIA 正股嘅，咁我係之前我喺YouTube 都有講過啦。咁我嗰陣時係180幾左右沽過，咁之後佢夾穿咗呢條線，我就走咗啦。咁之後咧，我喺前嗰幾日啦，咁差唔多200蚊嗰啲位有再 put，咁而家夾到210，就嚟去到我嘅死線啦。其實都，如果過到220嘅話，我就走啦，就認輸啦。之後，如果頭先講啦，SV 500如果你係保有嘅，咁你會 aim 4180嗰啲位，咁而家4180穿埋，而家係4183咯，穿到去。咁NQ 就129左右嗰啲位啦。如果係咁話，目標就係咁。道指咧就應該繼續都會 respect 呢條線啩。即係大約35000左右，34500左右嗰啲位咯。正常佢就會 respect 嘅。當你見到連 RKLB 咁嘅廢股都可以升到3% 嘅時候，你就知道呢個市係幾咁惡劣啊！RRY， 哇！大家咁熟嘅呢隻個名。RRY 咁你睇到我點畫呢兩條線啊？即係如果我要收嘅，我可能大約係喺呢個底啦，即係同呢條斜線 crossover 嘅位，即係大約可能19.8、19.9左右呢啲位，我覺得會收得好啲咯。咁收完之後就要期待佢破呢個上升三角。我覺得最癲真係 Meta， 唔好講笑。 其實我覺得咧 Tesla 咧，即係你104冇買到啦，或者可能110你冇買到呢隻非戰之罪嚟。但問題係當佢即係我哋噏嘅時候講佢 beta 6.5或者17.8呢位唔收集咧，就真係 miss 咗好機會。咁至於你話我之後再搏呢啲咁，但係你如果搏呢啲，其實你搏贏咗 ER 啊嘛。之後你再搏嘅話，呢啲其實你係搏贏咗個議息啫嘛。即係呢啲係賭嚟噶嘛，係咪先？即係呢啲係 earning 後嘅，我覺得就係賭嚟。但係呢一啲就係真係你嘅技術嚟嘅。如果你啲入哇 NQ 升咗3%，搞乜？話 UNVR 呢啲我唔畫，因為其實佢擠到咁樣冇乜嘢好畫啦。咁如果帶你睇 weekly 嘅話，你會知道佢雙底咁樣夾緊上去。咁之後而家再做緊個 handle 咁上，咁呢啲冇咩好講啊。佢係咁爆上去嘅，冇位睇嘅。其實冇話太唔太波啊！你而家入親一定係賭啊！ 所以呢個根本已經唔係搏唔搏，係你想賭幾大嘅啫。不過其實如果你話要我講嘅話，我自己睇個基本面，我覺得 Amazon 好過 Google 咯。但係都唔知佢會唔會又玩 buyback 啦。如果佢又玩 buyback 咧，咁啊真係不得了，冇嘢好講啊！呢真係係咪先？冇得估，亦都冇得講。其實升到咁，我自己唔識追啊！真係我唔會咁樣追噶。因為其實就算你不論 Snap 啊、Facebook 啊等等嗰啲，其實廣告業務唔係話做得好好嘛。咁所以我覺得 Google 個廣告業務都係麻麻地。咁但係 Amazon 你嗰啲雲端啊、成嗰啲，其實佢係dominate咗個市場，所以其實我覺得佢唔會受太大影響。咁我自己嘅諗法係咁樣。咁呢個純粹係我嘅諗法，唔好 take advice 啊。 唉，即係咁當然啦，我都會係咁諗，就係如果當時買大注啲嘅話就好咁，即係如果 all in 咗就好啦，而家唔使做添啊，今年已經係咪先？即係而家反而最頭痛嘅係咩呢？就係而家揸住啲正股，你都唔知幾時放好。即係例如 Tesla 咁樣，呢位揸上去嘅咁樣，咁點搞呢？即係有咩位可以放呢？其實都好似冇咩位可以放。即係當時就算我話就算睇跌，你都要穿到162先跌啦，佢都唔穿啊，佢咧就咁爆上。咁你話喂，當時如果見到呢度係咪加倉位啊？哇！我真係覺得呢啲根本係有少運氣喺度。如果呢啲位加，即係你可能睇咗 M5，咁你加咗上去之後一直冇走咁咯。咁 fine 啦，如果係咁。但係如果你睇日線嘅話，你基本上冇咩位價去到呢位。唔關事啊，因為 VIX 其實佢係一個預計之後幾大波幅嘅嘢啊嘛。佢預咗就係之後平咯，即係如果而家咁樣睇嘅話，佢預想橫行咯。咁但係佢會唔會咁樣橫行啊？睇啲圖就唔似啦。即係可能我當熄咗啲線去啊，費事有 bias 啊。如果熄晒啲線去呢，你又更加覺得佢會一嘢抽上去添，好似無限量咁抽上去咁添。而家仲不過如果 review 翻啲圖呢，我自己有少少覺得，如果呢一個位佢縮得翻入去啲陽燭咁樣咧，其實呢度應該係買 call 嘅做。咁但係呢個係 FOMC 啊。咁但係如果唔睇 FOMC 咧，的確係應該 call 嘅。嗰陣時我都有講就係話，如果唔係 FOMC 嘅話，我都買咗指數。咁但係冇辦法啦，而家事實就係咁樣。咁最主要就係而家今日收市其實有3隻好大嘅股，你會出 3隻都係納指股啦。呢3隻差唔多佔咗納指2成幾噶嘛，隨時3成添啦。我唔知而家個 weighting 係幾多，但係佢哋肯定有2-3成走唔甩。咁佢哋一出呢，如果佢哋有啲咩不幸向下爆炸呢，就嘭一聲呢，就可以落翻去124嗰啲位都得咯。咁但係就唔知啦，即係因為而家你 Facebook 其實佢升係因為佢 buy back 啊，咁呢其實有少少場外 manipulate 噶嘛嘅嘢嚟噶嘛，你呢樣你冇得估噶嘛，都唔係隻股 perform 好唔好。如果佢淨係計Meta 嘅 performance，梗係差到爆啦，係咪先？即係其實如果就咁睇最簡單嗰幾個數字啊，佢 earning 嘅 estimate 係2.2啦，但係佢 report 得1.76嘅啫嘛，佢爭咗成2成噶嘛。咁之後佢個 revenue 方面其實佢多啲咁多啦。OK，咁其實唔靚咯啲盤數。咁同埋其實如果你有睇到佢嗰個研發費用嗰啲啊，其實佢仲係用緊4-5倍嘅研發費用去搞個 universe 噶嘛。咁當然啦，另一方面華爾街嘅解讀就係話，佢雖然用4-5倍 of 佢 turnover 嘅費用去 explore 呢個 universe，咁但係 at the same time 其實已經比之前減少咗，即係佢都有聽到市場嘅聲音嘅咁樣，咁佢哋都有 analyst 係咁樣講嘅。但係鑑於呢排我實在太登啦，即係估業績基本上冇一隻係中嘅，所以我已經唔敢再開口去估究竟邊隻會爆，邊隻會升。 其實其中一個升得我最唔明嘅板塊就係個 chip sector，因為其實如果你即係如果佢真係會 recession 啊，唔理佢 soft landing 定 hard landing 都好啦，總之就 GDP 都係減弱緊啦。咁生產嘅嘢都係越嚟越少啊，剩嘅話，我唔明點解個 chips 會係可以爆得咁犀利。即係如果你話下一個 sector 會跌得最勁嘅，我一定會係估 chips 咯。佢真係 overshoot 得好犀利，我呢個成個板塊都係。嗱，今日咧，其實你會開始見到咧，前嗰幾日爆得好勁嗰啲股咧，有啲開始冇爆得咁勁，咁多啲力都用得好盡啊，其實都。咁但係你話會唔會出完今晚業績後再爆？咁我真係唔敢講，因為呢啲真係場外因素嚟。咁如果好似如果你係我咁啦，咁我有揸 U 噶嘛，我揸咗好多噶嘛，你知我。咁如果其實去到呢位咧，我會 take 少少 profit 咯，點都，因為我始終有8日揸一個小會啦，我自己覺得係咪先？咁啊，去到呢啲阻力位，我就會 take 部分 profit 咯。咁你話好啦，我 take 完之後點處置啊啲錢咁樣？咁我梗係希望第日佢回翻嘅時候，我可以再買多啲咯。連 Fastly 呢根本應該破產嘅公司，而家都升翻上去。哇 ！QS 大爆發喎，睇下先。哇 ！QS 突然間爆咗17%，GHPT，Charge Point 都係啦。其實啲圖真係好牛啊！其實而家，咁 Uber 呢啲垃圾股又係啊 ，Grab 啊，千祈唔好掂 ，Grab 呢隻嘢真係 scam 到爆。咁另外迪士尼啦，迪士尼咧，我哋之前咧有幾個星期嘅 YouTube 咧都有講過呢隻，咁非常強調就係佢呢條91個半嘅線咧係非常 respectable。咁啊講咗幾次，如果要收集呢隻股咧，就要91個半收集。咁啊而家係110。咁如果日線就係咁樣。Catch 咧就真係要回嘅，咁呢隻嘢咧就真係升得太勁，因為其實你呢啲會派息嘅股嚟噶嘛，其實你如果用翻炒港股個思維炒，其實 OK 嘅呢啲。咁但係如果你話我係一個睇 TA 嘅，咁你會期啦 ，OK。會破期，咁之後升上去，咁之後佢 backtest 期啊 ，suppose 佢會，咁我話多數嗰啲 TA 嗰啲會咁睇啦。咁如果 test 到支期嘅話，佢 below 200咧，其實呢啲股你可以買，呢啲係絕對唔會死人嘅。 上次 ER 咧 FedEx 咧就出咗，總之話就係啲earning 嘅 estimation 好低啦，咁之後就裂口跌咗落嚟啦，咁之後而家連個裂口都補埋啦已經。真係牛到爆，反而你 BRKB 再暫時冇乜突破，可能佢炸石油股反而拖累咗佢添而家。DE 咧嗰陣時大約361咧，我哋有提過嘅。咁啊，之後嗰陣時目標就係去到389，咁之後佢超額完成咗。咁其實佢而家補埋裂口，而家再會落翻嚟咧，呢啲嘢應該走啊，即係。如果呢啲冇走到，而家應該就走。之後睇一睇 Doctor Copper 啦 ，Doctor Copper 咧，我哋就群裏邊啦，咁啊。我都講好似啊，其實 Copper 咧就好 respect 呢個黃金比率嘅，咁大家一睇就明白啦。咁啊，總之618嗰陣時 put 係一個爽位嚟，咁而家佢做咗2支大十字星啦。咁正常人咧，如果你係有沽倉嘅咧，見到咁樣嘅情況咧，你就應該離場睇定啲係會做乜嘅。之後太陽能股啦，之前 ENPH 咧，我哋就話佢好弱嘅，咁啊佢穿咗呢條頸線，而家 back test 緊，咁而家就 critical 緊啦，咁就究竟佢之後會上翻去啦，咁啊冇事啦。如果佢穿唔到呢度咧，咁啊會繼續上落去。plug 望一望就算啦，啲都唔係好想再掂嘅嘢嚟。其實麥當勞啲道指股啦，你見到佢走勢其實都還可以喎。其實佢做咗幾次下影都係維持到喺呢位，咁我會 hold 到個價值。咁之後另一隻 cost 啦，cost 就係一隻佢經常講非常好嘅一隻股啊，呢個係。咁你見到佢而家又上去 test 618個位。咁上邊呢條就斷翻嚟，穿咗，咁唔使用添啊！上面呢條，咁我係618個位嘅 target。我 DANG 係啲嘢 show up 咗 first target 啦，冇乜特別啦，但係會其實啲大麻股係 perform 成啲。其實咧，如果你中意大麻股嘅人咧，你又真係要小心啲咯，因為其實咧之前炒得咁高啦，係因為民主黨嗰邊提倡咗好多可以放寬大麻嘅措施啊嘛。咁但係其實呢紮措施咧，而家講下咧，拜登就冇再重提啦。咁所以你就要諗下，究竟仲可唔可以去炒呢啲嘢？咁而家睇嚟就問啲啦。PayPal 就過咗一個阻力啦，一嘢彈上，佢就係 ER，冇咩特別嘢睇。 我再睇翻幾隻我哋嘅外股，又係 Amazon、Tesla 嗰啲，又係瘋狂無限咁樣上升緊啦。之後我哋晶片就啲力細咗少少啦。咁我諗大家都攰啊，今日真係差唔多去到呢度算啦。咁好啊，多謝晒大家，真係估唔到我哋今日有成50幾人喺度聽，所以就 thank you。好啦，咁就睇下聽日可唔可以再見啊！多謝晒，拜拜。